говорит и показывает Москва. Слушайте и смотрите Красную площадь. Парад Победы!
And in that time when you're growing up, you don't really know what's what actually happened, who fought which war. You kind of believe it. But now, talking about that there is nothing more important than love for your home country to victory for your country. Hip, hip, hooray. There you go. So, I don't think we've heard anything that significant. Very soft touch, as you rightly said. No announcement of further mobilization, of further dedication to making that victory come along. No further actions, really. And what's really interesting, no loud mentions of any great victories in Ukraine either. It's basically a very kind of self-defensive act, this speech of saying, okay, we're being attacked, we're under threat by, I don't know, gay people from the West, essentially.
Degenerates in the West.
Yeah, degenerates.
People who might have a glass of wine at lunchtime.
Gays and Nazis, because every nation has sent their own Nazis to Ukraine to fight the glorious Russia. Oh, there's Lavrov. So that's quite a weak speech. That would be my summary of it.
And did he give any agency whatsoever to Ukraine, or is Ukraine the hapless victim of the degenerate West, and you're just having this thing done to you by NATO and the US and the UK and everyone else?
So that was quite a careful balance. He didn't give Ukraine any agency whatsoever, but he also didn't try to make a victim out of it. It's Ukraine was influenced and probably brainwashed and then became home to all the Nazis from across the world. And it's interesting that he's mentioned two states in the West, the United States and the United Kingdom. So you guys are clearly playing the strongest role in helping Ukraine defend itself. No other EU nations, none of that. And then an interesting careful notch towards China and fighting imperialist Japan, who, again, Japan is also helping Ukraine quite significantly in this war.
So does that, would he be singling out the chief baddies here? Does he see the US and the UK as the linchpins holding the external support for Ukraine together?
It seems like it. I think he does realize that where probably all the support stems from. Those are the two nations who kind of corroborate NATO's support for Ukraine, that are the core of NATO. Maybe I think that's also an address towards the internal audience, which inevitably it is. But I think the goal there was to kind of name the two countries that are deemed as aggressors against Russia and still leave France and Germany out of it, just because, Russians will still want to go holiday on the southern coast of France, and Germany was always a bit stronger ally than everyone else in Europe. So that was quite interesting that he left everyone out of it.
And obviously name-checked China, because he's desperate for a much closer relationship with China. He needs political top cover in the UN Security Council. He needs weapons, he needs oil. So yes, unsurprising that he name-checked China. When I did this last year, pretty certain China didn't get such top billing. I don't remember a mention.
I don't think it did. I don't think it did indeed. And I think he really put in a lot of effort to get those leaders of CSTO nations, some of them, to Moscow, because I think last year there was no show either. I think it was one or two leaders at most.
So if we may just talk briefly about the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, what Putin would like to style as his equivalent of NATO. How big is it? Who are they? Where do they come from? And what does it mean to have that together?
So he tried to get all of the post-Soviet states into that organization. It's a very new collective of states, military base, as you rightly said. That's an aspiring NATO of Eurasia, I suppose. Maybe that's the right way to call it. So we have Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Armenia there. The Armenian Prime Minister is the chairman of CSTO, obviously Russia. There are some countries that refuse to participate strongly in CSTO or don't donate as much as Putin would like them to, or don't participate in the so-called peacekeeping campaigns. One of those peacekeeping campaigns are in Karabakh in Azerbaijan. So there is that issue between Armenia and Azerbaijan. That's why Azerbaijan is not really part of that community. And it's really just Russia bullying all the nations that are dependent on Russia economically into contributing military-wise and, most importantly, their people to go fight their wars wherever they're needed. Because I think even yesterday I read on the news in Russia that Russia is actively trying to recruit labor workers in Central Asia. So they're promising them a shortcut to Russian citizenship just to come work to Russia. And obviously we know that as soon as you come over to work and you get your citizenship, you're mobilized, you're off to the front line.
Yeah.
So he's still trying, being as imperialist as it comes, to recruit people from Central Asia to go fight their war.
This was migrant workers from other nations who are working in Russia were offered 1 year as opposed to 5 years fast track to citizenship, plus a sign-on bounty and a generous monthly wage for the months that you're still alive, type of thing. Because he's desperate not to mobilise. He can't. Even he feels that he could not take Russian society with him to go for full mobilisation, because he'd then have to say it's not a special military operation, it's a war. And so he's got to find personnel by any means he can. We've seen the Wagner group, the mercenary group, emptying prisons with deals that serve for 6 months in Ukraine and then have your convictions quashed. And we believe some have, the few that have survived 6 months. But they're desperate to get manpower from wherever they can. I've heard anything from 2 weeks up to a month of training, which is nothing.
That's
and
ridiculous.
then shove forward.
Yeah. And I just find it despicable that the presidents of those states can sit there peacefully, completely subjugated to Putin, and just kind of face their people being called into Russia and then sent off and killed off on the front line, rather than ethnic Russians. How do you allow yourself to be subjugated? How are you leaders to free nations and independent states?
How much of a choice do they have?
Well, look, they're still independent states. Yes, they're heavily reliant on Russian economy. Kazakh gas is flowing through Russia mostly. You have all sorts of other ties and trade, imports and exports, and obviously labor. Sure, you even get loads of influx of Russian money and investments into your countries. But Ukraine was in the same position once, because obviously that was the Russian goal. There comes a time when you need to actually become independent, sovereign state and stand up for your people. It does come with a price. We're paying it now, and yet we are ready to pay that price.
Now, Kazakhstan has played an interesting diplomatic game in the last year. In January 2022, President Tokayev needed to call in the CSTO brackets. It was Russian troops, probably 98%, to put down popular uprising in Kazakhstan. So we thought that he was absolutely beholden then to Putin, but he's tried to carve out a little bit of diplomatic distance since then. He's here today, clearly. You'll point him out again when we see him shortly, but he has tried to carve out a little bit of diplomatic room for manoeuvre, has he not, or am I being too generous to him?
I think he has, and that's why I'm a bit surprised seeing him here today, but maybe that is, his nudge towards Russia and trying to balance.
He's just there on the left of the screen, isn't he?
Far left, yes. He managed to get out of last year's protests quite successfully in the country, and he even asked the so-called CSTO fighters out of his country as soon as the situation was stabilized. He's engaging with the West quite actively, and not skipping any dialogues with Secretary Blinken to cleverly, the UK Secretary of State visited Kazakhstan just ahead of their elections in April. They are trying to advance their democracy as well by, for example, limiting presidential term to only one 7-year period. So this could essentially be the last last presidential term for Tokayev, and he actually implemented those changes. So I think they're making their steps forward. And last time I spoke to some friends from Kazakhstan, from the diplomatic service, they were saying that about 64 major global companies have now moved from Russia into Kazakhstan because they have a very good legislative environment for businesses to move. Whoever's leaving Russia, they're either leaving and going back home to the West, or they're going to Kazakhstan. So I think that's quite a promising country in Central Asia to pay strong attention to and try to make them our friends rather than Russia's. Obviously, there's also China, who's a strong ally and partner to Kazakhstan.
Now, can I just ask, I wonder if I'm confusing myself here. There seem to be many more people on parade here smiling, not these sort of granite-faced gentlemen here, but a lot of people seem to be smiling, and I've never seen that before from Russian, or have I just not been looking closely? I wonder if they've all been told, show you having a good time, lads.
Indeed, and I haven't actually seen these straight lines before, because normally it's all a bit hectic and you could see that it's forced and really a bit disheveled. Whereas I think they've tried hard. I'm sure they've been asked or forced into smiling, put on a brave face. You know, NATO is attacking us, but look how great we are, we're going to prevail. All the same tactics for putting on a good show.
Well, I mean, if you're going to have a drill parade, then you do need your straight lines. I've got a certain sympathy there. I seem to remember drill is a pill which should be taken twice a day. Thank you, Colour Sergeant Brian Crilly of the Irish Guards.